Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our research and winemaking webinar series. Thank you for being with us today. We hope you will enjoy it and you will develop knowledge and learn skills to be used in your vineyard and winery. So I'm Dr. Aude Watrolo, an assistant professor and extension specialist of enology in the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition at Iowa State University. And I'm co-hosting this webinar with my friend and colleague, Drew Horton, a research specialist of enology at the University of Minnesota's Grape Breeding and Enology Project. Oh. Hi, John. So before starting the webinar, here are some instructions. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on YouTube, hopefully by the end of the week. The webinars of the past 3 years are already published and available with the link that I will share on the chat box. If you have any questions during all the presentation, please use the chat box that you can find at the bottom of your screen, clicking on the 3 dots. And we will answer those questions by the end of the webinar. At the end also of the webinar, you will have a link for a survey to complete about how we did and what we can improve or change for the future webinars. So please just take 2 to 5 minutes at the end to complete the survey. So today we will have 2 presentations of about 25 minutes. The first one being from Dr. Randall Vos from Iowa State University, who will present and discuss some of his research on viticultural parameters to consider for optimal ripeness of cold hardy grapes, focusing especially on the variety cultivar La Crescent. This presentation will be followed by a presentation from Dr. Karine Pedneault from the Université du Quebec en Outaouais, who will present her research about the importance of optimum ripeness parameters and strategies to use for grape and wine quality. After the presentation, we will discuss and answer any question you have from the audience with grape and wine industry members, Chris Larsen from Compass Hill Vineyard, Iowa, Jamieson Lindquist from Grand Cordon Vineyard in Minnesota, Jon Roisen, Parle Valley Vineyard in Minnesota, Alan Robertson from Bobwhite Vines Vineyard in Kansas, and Bob Wersen from Tassel Ridge Winery in Iowa. But let's start by the presentation of Dr. Vos.
And I will introduce Dr. Vos. Dr. Randall Vos is the Commercial Fruit Crops Field Specialist for Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, where he provides expert technical assistance to fruit growers throughout the state of Iowa. His experience has included practical viticulture topics such as nitrogen fertilization, crop load ratios, and harvest timing, which is a subject that we're going to certainly look into today. Prior to working in Extension, Dr. Vos taught production horticulture courses and served as the coordinator for the Mid-American Wine Competition at Des Moines Area Community College. Randall, the stage is yours.
Why, thank you. So, yeah, thanks for letting me talk today. We'll talk a little bit about ripeness, and you probably notice a lot in my presentation. There's a lot of question marks because you know, ripeness is it's a pretty vague concept, and so I'll spend a little bit of the first bit of it just kind of defining how I describe that. Again, other people maybe use different terms and all that kind of stuff. If you ever want to contact me, my contact info is on there. I do have a every other week viticulture newsletter if you want to scan that QR code thing to sign up for. And I know nothing about social media at all, but I am trying to post stuff on Instagram and Facebook, just pictures of what I see every now and then. So feel free to look into that. So probably wondering why in the world we have bananas on this. We're not talking about bananas, but I think when we talk about ripeness, bananas are a pretty good analogy because there's a lot of personal preference, and the type of bananas we choose for what we're doing varies. And I don't know about you, and I'm not asking you to raise your hand or put in the chat box what number you are, but if I'm eating a banana, I don't want to go past a 5. Like any brown on it, I don't like. Versus, you know, if you're making banana bread, we typically go on the 7 or farther over. And so, you know, bananas might not be the best analogy to grapes because bananas are a climacteric fruit, which they continue to ripen after they're picked, and grapes don't. But I always think it's kind of a decent analogy to get people thinking about ripening being more of a spectrum than an endpoint. Things are constantly changing, and it's kind of complicated that way. You know, ripe is relative is generally what I say. And so I kind of break it down into grape maturity and grape ripeness. And when I think about fruit, once it hits a certain point, it's actually kind of a dying tissue. I mean, you've probably had fruit on your countertop and it starts to rot a little bit. You know, fruit is not something that lasts forever. It's a rare thing in nature to have all this sugar, and at some point it reaches its peak and it goes downhill. And so we have our kind of traditional components of what I generally refer as maturity, and that's Brix PHTA. And then generally when I refer to ripeness, I refer to flavor and aroma compounds. And when we talk about what ripe is, I kind of look at it from two perspectives. We're trying to accumulate positive flavors and aromas, and we're trying to decrease negative flavors and aromas. And so that's kind of how I look at it. And so when I talk about maturity, I'm talking about hard numbers, Brix PHTA. When I get into ripeness or ripe, for this presentation, I generally refer to aroma and flavor compounds. I group those together because you know, most of these are actually aromas that we're sensing. And what is optimal really depends on the wine style you're looking to put these grapes into. And so I always encourage wineries to communicate with growers as to what is this product going into, so they know maybe what they should look at when picking, rather than just saying pick the grapes. And a lot of this is really dependent on, number one, the cultivar. Certain cultivars only attain certain flavors and aromas. Climate, you know, I always, the word cold climate grapes always bothers me a little bit, just because, yeah, to get through our winters, these grapes are very cold hardy. But if you're picking in August in Iowa, it is not a cold climate. And so we sometimes got to maybe think about, in reference to ripening time, we may not necessarily be a cold climate. But we are definitely short growing seasons. Obviously, Minnesota being shorter than Iowa in terms of growing seasons. So the word cold climate describes what our vines have to live through, but maybe not always the temperature at ripening. And then management, you know, what have we done in these vines to set them up to either accumulate positive flavors or lead to the decrease of negative flavors? And so I forget who said this quote, or maybe I made it up, I don't know. But, you know, when we're growing grapes, we almost have to look at it like we're farming for flavor, aroma, and color to some degree. You can buy an artificially flavored sugar drink and you can tell it's artificially flavored, right? I mean, it's pretty clear. It's tough to mimic these flavors and aromas that we have in our grapes. And so, you know, we put a lot of focus on the maturity indices like Brix PHTA, as we should, but it's much more harder to quantify flavor, aroma, color, because they're complicated to analyze, and we're not always 100% certain what actually causes them. So if we look at this kind of ripening spectrum, you know, generally as grapes ripen, the TA decreases, the pH increase, and sugar increases, but it's not the exact same every year. You know, if I have a heavy crop load on these vines, they're probably going to ripen on the lower end of that sugar bar there, versus a low crop load, they're probably going to ripen at the higher end of that spectrum. But the thing is, it doesn't mean it's higher in quality. It just means that sugar only had fewer grapes to go into. And so while Brix PHTA are super important, high sugar does not always mean high quality, because it could be you have a very low crop load and thus you have very aggressive canopy and a lot of shade in that plant. So again, it's a tough thing to look at because these traditional parameters don't tell us, is that fruit actually going to have ripe flavors and aromas? And so that's one of the things I've always been curious about, and what kind of spurred some stuff I did 10, 15 years ago and some recent stuff. So what I did with the Midwest Grape and Wine Industry Institute last year, we did some Crescent trials where we picked at 3 different times, and we did 3 different levels of canopy management. And so I just threw up these numbers here. So we picked on August 25, August 30, and September 6, only about a week apart. And that was on purpose. You know, we really wanted to actually get the true spectrum of what were realistic harvests. I don't want to pick it out like a pH 2.8 and 3.6, and don't get me wrong, sometimes that happens. We wanted to pick within a spectrum of what are realistic harvests. And as is typical, you know, the Brix increased with later harvests, the pH increased, and the TA went down. Then the question is, what was the flavor and aroma differences? And that's what I'll talk about towards the end. So I also pulled some data from Crescent from the Cornell Veraison to Harvest newsletters. If you aren't familiar with them, weekly, starting at Veraison, they publish the Brix pH/TA of cultivars in their plots, and then they note when they harvest it. And so I just pulled the last 8 or so years. And I don't know 100% that those dates on the left are when they harvested. That's just the last maturity date in the newsletter. I just want to point out a couple spots on there. If you look at 2018, 2019, they picked at the exact same pH for all intents and purposes, but they were 3 degrees Brix apart. Again, we don't know that 2019, the flavor was any worse. It just came in at a lower sugar level. And so sometimes people will say, well, what do I pick based on? And I do know some growers and wineries do pick based on Brix. And if that works for your location, great. I would caution transcribing that to another location, because you may have a different crop load, different climate, and looking at Brix alone, again, probably doesn't tell us the whole picture. Because if we look at 2020, 2021, they basically picked on the same date each time, so late September, same pH, same TA, very different Brix. Again, it could have been a growing season issue, a crop load issue. So, you know, if someone absolutely asked me in Iowa, what would I pick based on as my primary factor? Again, flavor and aroma are super important, but especially with terpenes, we can't, most of those are bound, so we can't really sense them until the wine is made. pH would probably be what I would tend to rely on here in Iowa, but we were just in Texas last week, and they talked about how some of their grapes are picked at a pH of like 4 or something crazy high, because the flavors and aromas do not develop until then. And so that just reiterates the whole fact that, again, these kind of vague terms, flavor and aroma, may be the most important of all. Obviously, we got wine stability issues as you pick at a high pH. So the thing we always like to talk about in the upper Midwest is acidity. And we talk about how we have a lot of malic acid. And I think one thing when we look at cold hardy grapes to maybe kind of separate is how do they change as they ripen in terms of acid profile? If you look at a traditional vinifera, which is kind of what this cartoonish chart is saying, you know, the malic acid starts high and it degrades faster than tartaric acid. And a lot of people view malic as like a harsher acid, more green acid from a sensory perspective. And so most vinifera in a warmer climate especially, they're going to be picked, and the tartaric acid is going to be higher than the malic. And so the question is, do our cold hardy hybrids do the same thing? And even within these cold hardy hybrids, are they the same? And so 10, 15 years ago, I looked at 4 different cultivars. I'm just showing Frontenac and Crescent here. And so the purple is Frontenac over the course of 2 years. The yellow is Crescent. And just to kind of orientate you, if you look at the Frontenac on 9/8, we picked it. It had roughly double the malic acid to tartaric. But as those grapes ripened, so if it's almost a 1, the malic and tartaric acid are almost the same. And so we see that happened in 2009. We start out with double the malic to tartaric, and by the time we had our last harvest, they're roughly equal. And on the bottom, in a warm year, we actually got much higher tartaric than malic. Well, not much higher, higher tartaric to malic. So we start out as the malic slightly higher than tartaric, and as it ripened, the malic degraded quicker than the tartaric. So the question is, do all our grapes do that? And so I pulled the Crescent, for example, and if you look at it, basically the ratio of malic tartaric didn't change at all throughout the ripening. You know, malic and tartaric were breaking down at the same rate. And no matter what time you harvest it, the top year was a cold year, the bottom year was a warm year, there's double the malic to tartaric. And so it starts to create that question, if we expect a variety like La Crescent or cultivar like La Crescent not to have a lot of malic acid, it's probably not a realistic expectation. And so from a sensory perspective, it is what it is. You know, just letting them hang longer, the TA will go down to some degree, but it's not going to change the ratio, or at least in these 2 years it didn't, of malic to tartaric. And so again, different acid profile between those two cultivars there, and that's just 2 examples of it. So can grapes be mature and not ripe? My answer to that is yes. They can be mature but not ripe, because ripe, I would say, is we decrease negative flavors and increase positive flavors. And so you know, we got this complex matrix of Brix PHTA, and I think a lot of us, me included, kind of have this view that, yeah, as grapes ripen, the unripe flavors decrease, and your viticulture practices are going to affect whether it decreases quickly or slowly. And so if I have lots of shade in the canopy, it might be toward the top of this line here. It degrades very slowly, versus if I maybe have sunlight, it degrades more quickly. I think from the other perspective, we tend to look at ripe flavors accumulating like this. You know, it's they keep increasing and increasing and increasing. And again, my canopy management might affect how quickly they increase. And I always question, is that even accurate? So, you know, you got all these complex little things going on. If I just change when I pick, that in itself has a huge impact on the sensory, probably of that little wines made from that, and the chemistry as well. And so I don't want to overcomplicate it even more, but I start to wonder, thinking of this banana analogy, is ripeness something like this? Does it peak at some point? Now, maybe you're at a very short growing season area and your grapes freeze before they get past that peak, and so you don't experience that downturn. And then maybe we start to increase our overripe flavors. And so, you know, if we look at stereotypes, you know, wineries generally say grape growers want to pick very early, and growers generally will say wineries always want to pick very late. And so I start to wonder, again, is it maybe we have a peak rather than this continuum of better and better and better the longer we let them hang? And that kind of created some of the thoughts that of the stuff I'm going to show you here in a little bit. So again, can grapes be mature but not ripe? Yes, I do think so. And the factors that I've looked into and have thought about were time of harvest and then canopy microclimate. So, and that's an interaction between sunlight, temperature, all those different things. And it's real tough for a grower or a commercial winery to pick at 3 different times, do different canopy management levels, and then create wine from that in small batches to see what does this change. It's tough because it takes a lot of micromanaging, and it's a very busy time of year. And so that's why I talked to the Midwest Grape and Wine Institute about, hey, how can we do some of these things? And then we were able to sample these wines sensory-wise at the Iowa Specialty Crop Growers Conference. So kind of my inspiration for this was Traumanet. And there was some work done at Purdue that correlated the golden color of Traminette to high levels of terpenes in the wine. And so again, terpenes, most of them are bound in the grape form, and so we can't really bite into that grape and see how many terpenes are in it because they're kind of released, so to speak, in the winemaking process. And they found a strong correlation between berry color and the amount of terpenes in the wine. So if you look at a cluster of La Crescent, I mean, you can see on the kind of left-hand side, we have some nice golden berries, and as you get into that canopy, they get more green. And so, you know, I assumed it was a similar situation to the Traminette situation. But again, the question is always, does it actually make a difference? You know, it's nice that they're lighter in color, but can people actually tell a difference between these? And that's ultimately the question. You know, I can recommend to growers you do X, Y, Z, but if it's not perceived in the wine, why would we make people do more work, more canopy management, and what have you? And so those are the kind of questions we looked at. So here are some La Crescent vines, high wire cordon that we were working on at a commercial grower, and I kind of took ownership of them mid June, about a year ago. And these are very well balanced vines. First of all, they're getting about 5 tons per acre. The vines probably have around 2 pounds of pruning weight, so they are not overly vigorous, and they're very well balanced. And so the minimal canopy management on the right-hand side is not actually too bad in terms of shade. Moderate canopy management, all I did was comb them once in June. You're seeing it right after that. And the intensive canopy management one, we combed them, we leaf pulled them, and then I also pulled some laterals in July in the fruiting zone. And here's what it looked like in late July. You can still see kind of a difference. Just that combing in the middle, that moderate canopy management still has some decent berry exposure. Intensive on the left-hand side probably has some more. And the minimal, we don't have a ton of berry exposure. So, and I just crudely figured out the cost of doing this, and these are probably underestimating the cost and overestimating the time though, because I was starting and stopping with a stopwatch and all that. But just to comb those vines, I kind of estimated it was going to be about, if you're pulling 4 tons per an acre, cost you an extra $25, $30 per ton. And if you're doing very intensive canopy management, around $70, $75 a ton. Again, that's probably a low estimate. So the question is, if we have sensory differences in these wines, number one, is it worth it to pay an extra $60 or $70 a ton to do all that work? And do we actually have the time to do it? And if there isn't a sensory difference, again, why are we going to do it then? There's other benefits too, which we're not going to get into here, but those are the kind of just the raw numbers I did. Again, they're not completely accurate. It was just some quick kind of scribbling on napkin kind of numbers. So we harvested this fruit, and statistically the Brix increased with each harvest, the pH increased with each harvest, and the TA decreased. But when you ran the numbers in terms of if we looked at the minimal canopy management, moderate, and intensive, there were no differences in the Brix pH TA at all. And so from a statistical standpoint, so we can say the fruit from a Brix pH TA maturity standpoint of all these harvests were not different. And so then the question is, from a sensory perspective, are they actually different, or do we see trends? So the Institute, Midwest Grape and Wine Industry Institute, made small batches of wine. They did 2 batches just in case there were some microbial issues. And so what we did at the last Iowa Specialty Producers Conference is we had a viticulture and enology session that had around 50 attendees, and we gave them too many aroma descriptors, around 20 basically, and said, rate these. terms of which is the most and which is the least to some degree, and I'll explain that here in a second. So we actually made 9 wines, and we thought, man, 9 wines is a lot for people to sample and do sensory on. So we did the 3 timing of harvest, and we just did the extremes of canopy management, the intensive and the minimal. And so in hindsight, we probably would have done this a little different, but we asked them to rank their highest, their top 4, high to low. And then if they didn't rank it, I gave it a 0. And this had a very wide range of people in it. Some were novices at the wine sensory analysis. Some were experts. And I actually ran the numbers both ways, and it actually wasn't too different. That the trends we saw with the whole group was very similar to those that actually had wine sensory analysis. So they did not drink these wines, I want to be clear, because there were definitely differences due to the TA and pH. And we just wanted to just focus on the aromas. And because again, when I talk about ripeness, it's a relative thing. And so that's what we focused on. So what I thought was actually the most interesting, or one of the interesting things was, you know, a lot of University of Minnesota info talks about Crescent having a lot of peach aromas, some citrus and so forth, and which we did get some of that. But in our particular panel, grapefruit was the highest, most commonly ranked aroma, and then melon, then peach, then apple, then lemon, and going down the line. So I thought that, first of all, I thought that was kind of interesting that it differed a little bit from some other areas. Not that it may not have a similar sensory. So looking at some numbers, what I'm showing you here, and I wouldn't worry about the scale on the left-hand side because that's, I'd have to explain that a little bit, but we gave them the early, middle, and late harvest wines, and I averaged them. And what I did, since it was an untrained panel, I grouped the green aromas, the citrus, that'd be grapefruit, lemon, together in the citrus one. The tree fruits have like apple, peach, pear, apricot, tropical together, which would be melon. Can't think of the other ones off the top of my head. Floral, and then honey. And there's some interesting things here. Nothing stands out hardcore like day and night difference, but the early harvest definitely tended to have a trend of more citrus notes, and the tree harvest tended to have the late harvest tended to have more of these tree fruit notes. And so it's tough to look at how we analyze these from like a statistics standpoint based on how we did it, but it does seem like there's a trend that if I want more citrus in the Crescent, I would probably pick it early. And if I want more tree fruit, I would probably pick it on the late side. Again, we're not talking extremes of harvest of like pH 3.6 or something like that. If I remember correctly, the pH ranged from like 3 to 3.1, something like that. So we're not talking huge differences in times of harvest here. We're talking 5 to 7 days between these, but yet we saw some sensory differences, or trends, I should say. Again, I haven't run statistics on it just because of how we did it. It's a little tough to do that. Green aromas decrease with later harvest too, and that makes sense. What I thought was maybe the most interesting was the difference in the canopy management. And so the dark green ones here are, we did only suckering of these trunks. We didn't comb the vines. We didn't do any leaf removal or anything like that. And intensive was where we combed them, we leaf pulled, we suckered the fruiting zone. And to me, this was actually really interesting looking at these. And so if you look at this, it seems that, you know, if I really want high citrus flavors or aroma, excuse me, I probably don't need to do a lot of canopy management. If you look at these vines, and again, I'll use the caveat that these are extremely well balanced vines. I see some La Crescent on VSP where the yields are low and the pruning weights are really high. Minimal canopy management on those is probably not the same as minimal canopy management on a well-balanced high wire vine. Other interesting things, tropical increased with more canopy management. floral, there didn't seem to be a difference. And that surprised me the most, because we talk about these terpenes, these aromatic compounds, some of them tend to have like a floral nature to them. And we didn't see any clear trend. What was interesting is it does seem that if you want more honey aromas in your wine, that intensive canopy management will increase that. And so I'm going to show you a slide here where it combines all of these, and I'll kind of make some final thoughts on that here. So here we're looking at the different aroma groups. On the top is time of harvest. Again, early is on the left side of each group, late is on the right side. On the bottom is the canopy management. Minimal is on the left-hand side of each group, intensive on the right. Again, if I want to highlight a lot of citrus, if that's your goal, it seems like picking early and not doing intensive canopy management is probably the direction that of how things worked in 2022. We're doing this again in 2023, and we're going to do this with Frontenac Blanc as well, just to add another cultivar. Free fruit, a little bit different. And if I do aggressive canopy management on these vines, we didn't increase tree fruit aromas. We actually tended to have lower tree fruit aromas. But as we let the harvest go later and later, we tended to get more tree fruit. So again, that would lead us to think, okay, I don't have to do aggressive canopy management, but I do need to maybe let these grapes hang a little bit longer. Tropical, didn't see a lot of a clear trend with that in terms of timing of harvest, but it did seem like more canopy management increased that. And like I mentioned, the honey is the one that appears to have the clearest trend, that we almost had double the rating of honey for the intensive canopy management vines than the minimal. And in terms of the timing of harvest, it's kind of like a bell curve there. Now, is that an artifact? Is that statistically different? I honestly can't tell you. But when we talk about ripening not being an endpoint, but maybe a process, maybe a bell or something like that, maybe there is something to that. That the middle harvest might have, on average, higher notes of honey. Again, I can't say statistically that it is, but it's interesting. So, like I mentioned, we're going to do this again in 2023 with Old Crescent in the same spot. Frontenac Blanc, we're doing it as well. And our goal is to kind of pick away at these cultivars to just help provide people with information. So when they make harvest decisions or canopy management decisions, that at least we can try and point ourselves in the direction of the sensory profile that we want. Again, I'm sure the climate and year make a difference. And so that might make a bigger difference than the practices we do. But at least if we have an endpoint that we desire, we can try and put these vines in a situation where we move them in the direction of the sensory perception that we want. So to kind of wrap things up here, how do we know when to pick or what canopy management to do? Again, I'd first ask, what's your desired outcome in that wine? What are you going to make from it? That should guide your canopy management and harvest decisions. And then what factors impact that? Is it time of harvest? Is it canopy management? And again, in some cases it might be both, as we saw in the graphs before this. And then the question is, did we even put our vines in the situation where they can achieve that? And sometimes the answer is no. If those clusters never see sunlight at all, we may want a certain tropical flavor or aroma or something like that, but they may not be in the situation where they will produce that. And so we have to be realistic with ourselves that just letting them hang longer, they may not achieve that. And we got to be realistic with our situation. And then we always have limitations, right? So weather growing season is going to shift these around. In particular, with the Crescent, we have berry shelling. And I would have actually let that late harvest hang a little bit longer if I could, and I probably could have. but the berry shelling issue is well known with Crescent, and so we wanted to pick them well before that started, in particular because a lot of people that machine harvest in Iowa, the shelling is way worse with machine harvesting, at least the people that I've spoken to. Then obviously in a wet year, fruit rot might dictate we harvest a little early, and like I mentioned, different cultivars ripen at different times of the year. In a shorter growing season, you're pushing it closer and closer to your frost date, and maybe that will dictate when you pick. So that is my presentation. Like I mentioned, there's all my contact info if you want it. I think we're taking questions at the end, and so I'd be happy to discuss further after that.
Great. Thank you very much, Randall. That was really nice to see what's going on La Crescent. Perfect. I hope some of you have any questions. Feel free to use the chat box to type your questions, and we will answer them after the presentation of Karine Pedneault. So let me make her a presenter. So Professor Karine Pedneault is Associate Professor at the Department of Natural Science, Université du Quebec en Outaouais, and is attached to the Institut des Sciences de la Forêt Tempérée. So that's a French thing, but of the temperate forest, let's say that way. Professor Pedneault does research in grapevine biochemistry with focus on the impact of abiotic stress on berry ripening and grapevine life cycle in challenging environments. So Karine, you should be able to share your screen.
Yeah. All right, so looks okay.
The floor is yours.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Aude, for inviting me and for such a nice presentation. So I'm going to present a few things that are a little bit similar to Randall, but also different. So I think we're going to maybe answer some of the questions that Randall rose during his presentation, hopefully. So I'm going to focus on different questions that we have regarding berry ripening. So the first thing is what to target. So what do we want with our berries? Second thing is, how is seasonal climate impacting grape composition? And as Randall pointed out, it's very, well, it varies a lot depending on the parameters. So I'm going, pardon, I'm going to explain a little bit about that in my slides. Last thing is how to improve grape quality. So are there a few things we can do to improve grape quality in the field and in post-harvest? Although my talk will not talk much about post-harvest. I'm sorry. All right, so what to target with grape composition at harvest? So obviously, you know, within the parameters that we look at for berry ripening, sugar is the first thing and organic acid is the second thing. I'm so sorry, I have a, yeah, leave me 2 minutes, okay? Because I'm going to call or something.
That's fine, Karine.
Yeah, so
it
sorry.
happens.
I think it's dry out there for some reason.
Well, you take a minute and have a drink, and then you
I think
can
I should
continue.
be okay. Yeah. Grab one of these candies if I'm not doing good. So all right, so sugars and organic acids are the typical things we're looking at for harvest when you need to take harvest decisions in your field. You want the rates to be high, you want the acid to be low. So those are the two main parameters that you know. Two other parameters are very important. The second one, well, the third one is bound aroma. As Randall pointed out, bound aroma is aromaless. Actually, you cannot sense it with your sense because it's tasteless. So I'm going to present mostly about analysis that we've done regarding barn aroma in my group. So 2 groups of aroma, I'm going to focus on those 2 groups actually. Volatile phenols and terpenes and C13 nor isoprenoids. So the volatile phenols are mostly honey aroma, acacia flowers, tobacco, clove, for example, and curry flavors. So they can be very different because very different compounds goes in that group. But and depending on their concentration as well, they can give different sensory outcome actually in the wine. Second group of bound aroma, terpenes and C13 or isoprenoids, they come mostly from similar pathways in the berries. Terpenes are known to be, well, very famous actually to be floral aromas. If you think about Riesling, for example, and like Crescent, I think is a good example also of terpene-like aroma. So very floral, and those aroma will also contribute to fruit aroma in red wines, for example. And C13 no-isopenoids also contribute into those red and black fruit aroma in the wine. So 2 different groups here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about their changes during berry ripening. Last group, I'm not going to talk about for time's sake today, but tannins and color are 2 aspects that we want to look at also in berry ripening. Well, when we consider those aspects regarding cold hardy grapes, they're a little bit less relevant in the sense that we know that tannins are very low in cold hardy grapes and color is very high in general. So I would not say that these are the main parameters that we should look at regarding cold hardy grapes when we want to take a harvest decision. So some of the challenges that we have when we try to grow grapes in northern area, I want to show you this figure because actually we're growing berries and fast forward in northern area. So if you take a look at this, in typical grapevine aroma, you'll get your bud break around March, and well, you ripen your berries around September, October, and if you want, you can leave them in the field for as long as you want. I recall working in California, and we will leave the berries in the field as long, well, until it was ripe as the consumer wanted. So it's really a different mind state in those area. If you look at what we have in cold climate, well, it's breaking bud in around May and June, and then like super quick flowering, veraison, maturation, and then we harvest around end of September and beginning of October. So very much before first fall frost. And this happen only if you don't get also rain that will get your berry splits or anything like that. So you can see that it's going much faster than what we have in typical production area. Another specificity about cold climate grape production is that light is going low very quick in fall. So we have lots of light when grapevine is flowering, sorry, there's noise in my home. So we have a lots of light when in June and July, but then when we hit August and at September, light is decreasing fast. So this affects photosynthesis because photosynthesis, as you know, is dependent on light. So this is one aspect that we don't have control on, unfortunately, but we should also keep in mind when we look at berry ripening. So the main challenges that we have, of course, as you know, is high acidities and also the accumulation of varietal aroma that can be quite variable depending on the variety, depending on the conditions. Also, we have high color and low tannins, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. So also, another thing that we sometimes overlook is that conditions can lead to a high heterogeneity between clusters in a vineyard. So you can have, if you have variations in, especially at fruit set, for example, you can have a lot of myriandage and coulure. So you have incomplete clusters. You can have a lot of green berries among ripe berries. So this will also affect at the end the quality of your wine if you keep those berries in your wine when you process your grapes. So So I'm going to present a little bit a different approach to berry ripening. So the traditional approach that you can see here is that you will consider berry ripening from veraison. So berries are developing, they are green, they are hard, and then at a point they will actually start ripen during veraison. So this is usually how we consider berry ripening. I'm very sorry. I need to shut my door because my son is doing something.
Not a problem, Karine. We'll be glad to wait for you. And thank you all the audience participants for your patience and understanding.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Terrible talk. My son is cooking a smoothie or something. Whatever. Okay. So, all right. So usually we consider berry ripening from the veraison time, but and actually this aspect is really relevant mostly about sugars. So we all know sugars accumulates during that time, but before we jump to other aspects of berry ripening, I'm going to show a little bit what Randall showed. So high Brix doesn't mean high aroma. So we have here some data that we took about Riesling in Canada in 2 different sites a few years back. So you can see that Riesling at 19 Brix here had like much lower aroma, bound aroma here in blue, compared to Riesling at 17 Brix, you see. So this Riesling, which was harvested here for commercial harvest at week 5, this is a ripening assessment we've been doing from like one week apart from each other. So so here you can see that there was much more aroma in this Riesling here compared to this one, despite the higher Brix here. So sugars, as Randall pointed out, and as I show you here, is not really relevant to determine if the berries are of quality or not. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a different approach to ripening. So taking berry ripening from the very beginning of the season. So why I'm talking about that, why I do consider that, the reason is that many processes start earlier than the actual veraison in berry ripening. So for example, so malic acid, for example, we talked about malic acid decrease, the decrease of malic acid during veraison, but we don't talk much about the rise of malic acid before veraison. So this happens in green berries, and actually there are impacts of growing conditions that will affect the level of malic acid that will accumulate in the fruit. So obviously, if you accumulate more in the fruit prior veraison, you need to burn down more after during veraison, you see. So this curve here is important. We know sugars are doing, the same here. So what to expect from the malic acid rise and decrease is highly varietal dependent. I wanted to show you this graph, for example, with malic acid that shows, this is from Burzinski Cheng in 2019. So you can see that when you compare different species of grapevine, and you know that cold hardy grapes are composed of well, those species all crossed together, different, well, they have very complex genotypes. But what I want to show you here is that, for example, Vitis vinifera will rise really high prior veraison in malic acid and then decrease quickly and very low in terms of a malic acid concentration in the must. Vitis riparia is also following the same curve, but the levels are very higher. And you know that Vitis riparia is one of the variety, the species that we find in cold hardy grapes that gives actually the cold hardiness to many varieties that we grow in the north. So it's decreasing, but a little bit slower than Vitis vinifera. Vitis cinera, which is also used for breeding, although to a lesser extent, as far as I know, is actually keeping a lot of malic acid. So you can see that those differences are very important on the level that we will get at the end. Another thing, tartaric acid is doesn't follow a curve really clear, and this is actually it can decrease a little bit during veraison, but this is not well, it usually doesn't follow that much of a trend. Malic acid is the main one that decreases during veraison. So I'm going to show you a little bit some results that we have about malic acid. So in this experiment, we've been keeping the grapevines a little bit warmer during the whole season, during the pre-veraison period and during the post-veraison period, and also not at all in the control. So what we showed with this is that actually the fact of keeping the grapevine warmer during the day had little impact. Well, it did, we can say trend a little bit, like the grapevines that were under the greenhouse are here for the whole season, and during the pre-veraison are here. So there was maybe a little impact, but not significant actually on the level of malic acid at bunch closure. But then even if we kept the grapevine warm, there was not a significant decrease between treatment in terms of malic acid content. Still, malic acid decrease is really dependent upon the temperature in general, both for the accumulation and the decrease. But the thing is that it's mostly about night temperature. So malic acid is decreasing at night during respiration. So the cold nights are actually the bad guy in the story, because this is why we actually get those high acidities and that malic acid is not really going as low as it could in the cold climate. So what to do about that actually? So from the literature, when we look at what's going on with TA and cultural practices actually and seasonal climates, we see that in general, the seasonal climate is the main factor affecting the acidity that you will get in your berries at the end. So if you have like cold temperature, a lot of rain, it's likely that you're going to have a high acid year, let's say. Another thing is water deficit. So we usually don't get much water deficit in the north, at least in Quebec. I would say it tends to be more like the soil is usually quite wet, despite the drainage and despite the efforts that growers are putting to decrease the level of moisture in the soil. So a slight water deficit during early well, the first time of berry development, the first period of berry development may actually help to slow down a little bit the accumulation of malic acid, and then of course you have lower malic acid to get rid of during veraison. So well, this is something that can be tried, I guess, with again maybe more drainage, or if you are lucky enough to have a very dry site. I would say overall, like have a good selection of different varieties based on their different acid level at the at the varietal level, I would say. So if you have high acid, keep some low acid varieties, despite they're not maybe the best aroma grape, let's say, in your portfolio, in your vineyard. Be also flexible about wine style. Like if you, in cold year, it's a good idea to do sparkling wine instead of like a table white, for example. You can also explore some post-harvest processes. Obviously, you know about malolactic fermentation that consumes the malic acid, but also maybe you can work on malic acid consuming yeast. You can try to partial drying of grapes. Also is a way to reduce the acidity in berries. So there are a few things that you can try to manage the acidity in post harvest. Back to this graph. So other processes that happens during, well, a little bit earlier than what we usually consider in ripening, in berry ripening, is the accumulation of aroma precursors. So typically, most aroma, such as terpenes and C13 norazopanoids, are accumulating during veraison. This is well known in Vitis vinifera. This is what we see in cold hardy grapes. Well, at least in the few studies that have been done. There are also issues. Well, maybe I should not talk about that here, but you can see a little bit of a decrease of terpenes and C13 norazopanoids due to oxidation when berries are getting to, well, if they are exposed to sun a lot at the very end of the process, for example, this can affect the, or even at harvest, for example, if you're not careful enough with oxidation at harvest, it can reduce the level of terpenes and norazopanoids in your berries. So typically those will arise during veraison. But what is less considered is that volatile phenols, which are also important in many cold hardy grape varieties, start to build up actually during the pre-veraison time. And the reason for that is that the precursors for volatile phenols are certain types of organic acids, actually, and those accumulates during that time. So then the more you accumulate those precursors for volatile phenols, the more you will get the volatile phenols in your berries at the end. Another thing that happens in this whole process is that sunlight will also affect the level of terpenes and C13 norazopanoids that you will get in your berries at the end. So I don't know if you follow very well what I'm saying, but what happens here in terms of heat and light is affecting what you will get in your berries at the end when they are ripe. So it's really a long process, you see. So where I'm going with this is I want to show you how you can actually assess your on-site in terms of heat, actually, at least, because sunlight, I mean, you can manage it at the canopy level if you expose your berries more or less, but temperature, you have less control over it. But you can assess your site in terms of growing degree days accumulation. So very often we will consider growing degree days accumulation in the whole run for one season. But what I'm showing you here is that growing degree days accumulation can vary monthly from one site to another. So, for example, in these three sites that we have here, we have Orléans Islands in Quebec, we have Gaspereau and Carleton, Nova Scotia. So those two sites in Nova Scotia are a little bit colder than the Orléans Islands in the very beginning of the season. So May, June, July, Orléans Islands is warmer than those two sites. But look at this. In August, September, October, the Orléans Islands sites start to be a little colder than the other two, you see. So there's really a shift in terms of the curves itself, so Nova Scotia tends to have, and this is like over 10 years here, okay? So Nova Scotia tends to have a warmer veraison than Orléans Island. And in the contrary, the Orléans Island tends to have a warmer spring, but compared to a colder spring in Nova Scotia. So this, despite the fact that both will reach veraison more or less at the same time, okay? At the end of August, mid-August, the veraison starts in both sites, and they accumulate the same number of growing degree days. And what we see actually in those two sites is that, well, I leave it that here for now, and I'll get back to you with these two sites later on, and to show you what's the impact of this. So, so first thing to consider in terms of aroma, if you've been following what I've said so far, is that you want to farm maybe for volatile phenols or for terpenes and C13 norizopenoids. I've been listing a few varieties here that you know. Some of them are mostly toward volatile phenols in terms of varietal aroma. L'Acadie Blanc has a huge level of volatile phenols in its varietal aroma, even though this variety does also have terpenes, for example. So it's not like black or white, you know, but the main aromas that we'll find in those varieties here, Sabrevois, Sainte-Croix, Radisson, L'Acadie Blanc, so all those mostly have volatile phenols as, well, a good part of their varietal aroma. In the contrary, those varieties here tends to have more terpenes or C13 norizopenoids actually. So Vidal, Céval, Osceola Muscat, Saint-Pépin, Riesling, as you know, Frontenac and Marquette are mostly towards terpenes and C13 norizopenoids in their aroma profile. So you want to consider what's going on your site when you select your varieties, what you're going to plant actually, because if you tend to have always warmer spring and cold veraison, maybe it's better to go for a volatile phenol variety, because you're going to be able to really express the varietal aroma of those varieties. On the other side, if you tend to have a warmer fall, maybe you can focus on terpenes varieties, for example. So that's exactly what I was actually saying. So maybe I'm ahead of my slides. So volatile phenols tends to accumulate during early, well, the early conditions will have impact on volatile phenol precursors, bound aroma, let's say here, at the end in the ripe berries. Similarly, the conditions in the veraison will have impact mostly on terpenes and C13 norizopenoids. But again, the exposure of berries to sunlight here will impact the terpenes and C13 norizopenoids as well. So throughout the season, you really need to be careful about what you're doing. Of course, when I'm saying expose your berries, blah, 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 during the early, early veraison or early berry development, or even later on during the veraison, you want to be careful with sunburnt. You want to be careful with limiting oxidation, especially during this time here, because otherwise you might lose your terpenes. So these ask for carefulness throughout, but I hope you have a better understanding of what's going on here. And to go a little bit further in that, I know time is passing, Aude, I'm watching the clock. So to go a little bit further in that logic that I've been presenting, I can tell you here that from some regression that I've been doing with L'Acadie Blanc, we've showed that the rate of growing degree days accumulation early in season, so during pré-veraison, is well correlated to the level of volatile phenols precursors that we, well, bound volatile phenols, let's say, I don't want to confuse you, during in ripe berries. On the other side, if you look at the correlation, the same regression analysis with post-veraison accumulation of growing degree days, there's more or less no trend between the accumulation of volatile phenols and the conditions during post-veraison. In contrast, here, if you look at Riesling berries, there's more or less no impact about the accumulation of growing degree days during pré-veraison, but if you take a look at the post-veraison conditions, there's a good regression here showing that the more growing degree days you accumulate during post-veraison, the more likely you're going to have higher levels of bound terpenes in your berries. So I just have a couple of slides left, so I'm going to finish that soon. What about cold season, frost, delayed phenology, and other calamities that hits us in the north? So obviously spring frost, cold condition during early season will delay phenology and will affect berry ripening in the long run because, well, we have that very small window we can play with in terms of berry development, berry production, and ripening. So obviously, if you get a spring frost, I know that many of you experienced that this year. It's really, well, it is what it is, and there's not much we can do about it. Similarly, if you get cold condition early in the spring, it can affect the mériendage and coulure. So you want to be careful. Again, if it's cold, try to manage your canopy so you expose a little bit your flowers, you expose your berries, you try to keep some warmth. As Randall pointed out, the Brix pH-TA is little impacted by the conditions. So if it's going to be a cold year, unfortunately, there's not much you can do to avoid the high TA, actually. So it's better to take it from the winery perspective, maybe, and wine style perspective. So as you can see, also, I'm sure to show that point, I'm showing you here the evolution of well, changes in terpenes, volatile phenols, C13, isoprennoids, and Riesling in 2 seasons. So 2019 was a cold season, and 2020 was a warm season. And we've been sampling 1 week apart. Those little dots here are 1 week apart, but because I present it as a growing degree days accumulation, there's very little growing degree days accumulation between those dots you see. So in the cold season, there's not much going on at the end, unfortunately. Even though you leave the berries in the field, it's likely that nothing more will happen. On the other side, you may actually be hit by botrytis or other pests or rain, berry splitting, etc. So in contrast, in the warm season here, you can see that there was some nice increase here in terpenes. And again, I'm showing you the Nova Scotia side that had a warm veraison. You can see the rise of terpenes here compared to the site where it was colder. There was basically no difference here between those 2 weeks apart picking. So yeah, I'm going to, 31 minutes. So I just put a little resume. You will have access to those slides after about what I've been presenting. So I'm going to jump right to the concluding remarks. So as I pointed out, the acidity level is both varietal and cold dependent. So you need to have some proper varietal selection for your vineyard and flexibility to manage acidity, and probably some post-harvest processes may help with the acidity management. Aroma precursors, all aroma that you're going to build in your berries starts early with sun, with heat. So exposure of berries in the vineyard, and also at the end with terpenes accumulation and C13 isoprennoids accumulation during this veraison time. Skipping the volatile phenols line. So cold years leave little margin for improving berry quality, unfortunately, in the field. So well, again, flexibility is the rule, and I think you all understand that you have to be flexible when you grow grapes in the north. So Thank you very much. I give you a link to my ResearchGate, and also you can access some free presentation on free papers on this link. Also have access. I'll leave you that slides for you where you will find some publications that are open access publication from my group. So thank you very much, and sorry about the chaotic presentation.
Nope, no problem at all.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you, Karine, for the great presentation and all that current scientific information. You made the point, I think we've all made the point, the Europeans have been messing around with Riesling and Pinot Noir and Syrah for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We are the vanguard. We are the tip of the spear. We are the first generation, really, or maybe just coming into the beginning of the second generation of wine growers and winemakers working with these new cold hardy varietals. So we know quite a bit, but there is certainly a lot more work to do, especially for people like you, Karine, and Dr. Watrelot and Dr. Vos. So as a reminder to all participants, please type any questions you have in the chat box and we will answer them. You can access the chat box by clicking on the little circle with 3 dots on the bottom of the screen, or there may even just be a chat icon in the lower right of your screen, and you can write your questions there. So now we're going to have about a 20-minute panel discussion, a Q&A, and we will be joined, by Chris Larsen from Hill Vineyard in Iowa, Jamieson Lindquist from Grand Cordon Vineyard Management in Minnesota, Jon Roisen from Parle Valley Vineyards near Montevideo, Minnesota, Alan Robertson from Bobwhite Vines Vineyard in Kansas, and Bob Wersen from Tassel Ridge Winery in Iowa. Thank you to all of our presenters and to our panel participants. Aude, do we see anything, any questions in the chat box?
No, we don't.
We do not.
Not yet, but please type any
I
questions
do have
you
a question. I do have a question for Randall, actually.
Go right ahead.
Randall, I was wondering if you've been taking data about the yan on your berries. I guess you did.
They did, yeah. I don't have the numbers handy though, but I know they did.
Yeah. Do you recall if they were actually increasing with depending on the management that you've been doing?
Honestly, I don't recall. I can look and get back to you though. Sorry.
Because I really suspect that the tree fruit aroma you've been that was higher in your treatments that you had like the one with more canopy management, you had higher tree fruit, and the one that were later, sorry, had higher tree fruit in what you've been presenting. Well, tree fruit in general is related to yan.
Okay.
Because it's those aroma are made from amino acids. So if you have high yan, and yan is actually very often increasing with the ripening. So if you have high yan, you're going either because you've been leaving the fruit in the field, or because you've been doing a crazy management. Like if you rose your yan, it can rise your tree fruit aroma. That's what I would suspect, actually.
Okay, I'll
Very
take a look.
interesting. Yeah, you should.
I
should
think
take
that's
a
a
look.
great question for all the panelists here. What are the characteristics you're looking at when you evaluate it's time to harvest? Who wants to start by answering that question?
The characteristics that we look for when we're sampling for the I call it the scientific data, the pH, the Brix, the TA. I do the old-fashioned farmer sampling. I'm looking at the color of the seeds. I'm looking at the texture of the skin. Is the skin, depending upon the variety, is the skin tough? Is it beginning to loosen up? I'm looking at the aromas of the berries. I'm actually looking at the rachis. How what does the health of the rachis look like? That's going to tell me the quality of the fruit as well. And so a lot of visual cues that I use, in addition to just tasting. I spend a lot of time walking through the vineyard. My wife yells at me for eating our profits, but that's really part of the process.
Do you evaluate, Jan, to come back on the question from Karine?
No,
Jan is hard to evaluate. You need a spectrophotometer to do
Yeah.
so. So it's really it's more like a winery
Right.
assessment.
Yeah.
But to complete what you were saying, Alan, actually, berry sensory, I haven't talked about it, but berry sensory is very useful for growers to evaluate the parameters that you cannot evaluate otherwise. You can do your brace, you can do your TA, but berry sensory will give you information about the grape aroma, will give you information about tannins and the level of ripeness in your skin, in your seeds. And I've been working a few years back to put this method in place in Quebec, and I know many growers are using it. We've been adapting, and maybe Drew, you will recall, because I talk about that in Nebraska in Vineyard few years back, but that's very useful because your mouth is really a great instrument, to analyze some parameters that you will not be able to analyze with a simple instrument. So if you do berry sensory very systematically with the separation of skin, the separation of pulp, the separation of seeds, you can have some great information about what's going on in terms of aroma. And even though you cannot sense the bound aroma that are going to be expressed during the winemaking process, you can still detect the free aroma, and very likely both are working together in terms of terpenes, at least terpenes concentration, and C13 norazopanoids, volatile phenols. The only aroma that is actually higher in as free aroma than as bound aroma is the green aroma. But those compounds in general takes they have high sensory thresholds. So it means that you need to have a lot to actually sense them. So they don't really bother actually. So if you do it systematically, your berry sensory from one week to another, take notes, because if you don't take notes, you won't recall what's going on.
Right.
It's really something that can be useful if it's systematically done in the vineyard. It takes time though. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for those great explanation, Karine. That's good. Does anybody else is using sensory evaluation? John, do you do sensory? Do you taste the berries?
Well, Ellen was saying that he was doing, so that's good news.
Yeah.
Grace?
I would say, well, first off, we work really closely with the winery to kind of keep within their, profiles that they're looking for in our vineyard. But we grow two different varieties. We grow Frontenac Blanc and Petite Pearl in our vineyards. And what we've learned, or what I've learned, at least for my own personal preference, as we're looking through this with the Frontenac Blanc, if we tend to shoot for the lower, get that acid to lower, get that TA to drop on it. If we go too far, we tend to get very tropical in the flavor, and which is for my personal preference. I think in the winery we prefer to go more on the citrusy side, grassy side. So we've got to be careful there. And with the pearl, I would say one of the things that I look at a lot is the skin, and kind of chewing on that skin and getting a flavor and the feel from that, because our vineyard tends to be a little bit lower vigor. based on our site. And we find that we're not, especially on our pearl, we don't hit the higher bricks maybe that the winery would typically ask for. But so we do have to keep a close eye on that flavor and on that texture to kind of really hone in on what we want.
Frontenac can be really annoying actually in terms of flavor, because if it's heating too much, you're going to get that caramel aroma. Well, you don't want it. It's perennial and all those products from the degradation of sugars, like cooked sugars. So if it's cooking on grapevine, it's going to taste like caramel. So you want to be careful with Frontenac for sure.
I just will add what Chris said, something really important, and that is, as a grower, listen to what your winery is looking for, what style of wine they want to grow, or what style of wine they want to make, because that's going to determine. You mentioned, Chris, how you do your Frontenac grease. You said you had, with our Frontenac, the winery wants. They want a more of a tropical style wine from it, So they're actually replacing that a Concord grape with using our Frontenac, and so they want us to let ours hang a little longer, and that's fine too, as long as you're not getting to a point where you're shelling or you're getting raisioning or something like that. So we grow for 2 different wineries and we have 5 different varieties. So imagine the complexities that we have in terms of keeping people happy. But listening to what your winemaker wants and the style that they want to make is incredibly important as a grower.
So also, I have a question about because here in Quebec, the industry is mostly vineyards that grow their grapes for their own wine. This is mostly the model that we have here. It's based on the regulations and everything, but we don't have that much of that model where you have grape growers and wineries apart. So I was wondering how far you exchange with the winemakers, and how do they come often on site to taste berries, see what's going on, and what's the mechanic of that actually?
The wineries that we deal with, the winemakers both make visits to our vineyard at least twice a year. They come in the spring and look at what we're seeing as we're pruning. I should say winter, and then they will come usually probably a month. As soon as veraison starts in some of our varieties, they'll make a visit, and then we make visits to the winery itself, and before harvest, after harvest, we'll go to the winery, taste what's in the tanks. It gives us an idea of how we're doing as growers. If we see a deficiency or something in the wine as it's being processed, we'll begin to look back at our records and say, what did we do in terms of soil refinements and things like that, or how did we did we do enough hedging? Did we do enough skirting? Did we do enough combing? What did our records look like?
I want to jump in and ask a quick question. We've got 3 very qualified wine growers here: Jon Roisen, Bob Wersen, and Jamieson Lindquist. If you each could just answer the question that was asked earlier. Do any of you 3 do any sensory analysis? Do you guys taste, smell, check your seeds, check your skins, check your rachises, or are you just measuring bricks and pH perhaps? If each one of you could answer that.
We started on back when we first planted La Crescent, and we do it with all the varieties that we're really working on for the season. But we pick on flavor. We're out in the vineyard every other day as harvest approaches, and we're tasting the grapes, the skins, of course, is where the flavor is. And but at the same time, we've got our eyes on the rearview mirror, which is Mother Nature and birds. And if we, some years we get bird pressure, other years we never see a bird. And then the other thing is if we have rain that's expected, we know from experience that we're going to get berry splitting and shelling, and we mechanically harvest. And so shelling is a big deal. We'll start at one end of a 500-foot row with the harvester, and by the time the harvester's up midway into the row, sometimes half the grapes have dropped to the ground. So we're being, we have to be really careful about that.
Jon Roisen, what's your answer?
Mike?
Are you?
You're on mute, Jen. Yep.
Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah. There you go.
Bob mentioned birds. That's we net every year. We've been doing that for 22 years, and I kind of look at it as like a soybean crop or a corn crop. But soybean crop, they're just about ready for harvest, and the hail comes and it'll shell out. And birds are feathered hail. So that varies from year to year. It doesn't always, the netting time doesn't always start on a given date for us. And it has to do with horizon and color and sugar levels and I work with a winemaker at the winery that I sell my fruit to, and it's about 120 miles from where I live. We're on the west end of Minnesota. We're usually warmer and drier than Mankato, St. Peter, the Twin Cities. We're sort of the Spain of Minnesota out here, and but we're on about the same latitude. If I pull samples for the winemaker, I'll do it like I do when I want to test for moisture on corn. I'll walk through the vineyard like I would walking through a cornfield, and I'll get my hand ready to grab the fruit, but I'll look the other way because your eye always grabs the ripest and the nicest looking stuff. And I think that gives a fair sample. And,
Yeah, I call that the flying blind technique. Yeah. You're watching down the row, look to the right, look to the left, pick to the right. Don't look at what you're picking. Small cluster, little cluster, green cluster, whatever it is, you get a good random selection. But real quick, Jon, do you check? Do you taste the grapes? Do you check the color of the seeds? You do all that.
Yeah, and some varieties have more vivid aroma than others. There's a variety, of course, it isn't really a very good wine grape, and we tore most of it out last fall, King of the North.
Sure.
We do make a juice from it. But when that stuff was getting very ripe, you could stand out there and sniff it in the evening, and it was like smelling grape knee-high soda pop. It was so strong.
I've noticed that. I've noticed that with Edelweiss, that you can if you go out in the afternoon or the evening, you can certainly smell it as it ripens.
Yes.
But if you get the sun behind it, sometimes you can see right through the grapes themselves, and you can see that they're starting to soften, and you may want to get ready to pick them soon. Jamieson Lindquist, what is your answer to that question of sensory analysis, and how do you help your wineries decide when to pick?
Well, the main part is especially with the taste.
Jamieson, we lost you.
He's muted too.
Jamieson, we can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Now we can.
Now we can hear. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I actually worked at Chankaska Winery where Drew worked at, and then where Jon Roisen actually sells his fruit too also. And the winemaker I worked with was Mike Drash, who was actually a Napa winemaker, who was worked at Farniente and Luna and a bunch of different wineries. But I mean, the main thing we went off of was taste. So we would go around to wineries, and like the main thing is tasting. You know, people are always like, well, when should I pick the grapes? And you know, his response was always, have you tasted them yet? You know, that's a good thing to go off of. And I mean, during the season, I don't really ever eat grapes in the off season because all we do is eat so many grapes during the season. So it's like you kind of get tired of eating grapes. But you know, that's where I was trying to go off of is the taste and the profile. And, like, you know, it's you know, as you start doing it, you can get pretty good to where you kind of are pretty close to where you know the bricks are. You know, even within a couple, you know, we can kind of guess within a couple bricks just by taste, which is a good way to kind of, you know, if it's tasting good, it's probably ready. You know, the other part to it that a lot of people don't realize is that sometimes especially I do custom harvesting, you know, sometimes they get picked when they got to get picked, and that's just kind of, that's like, you know, it's either there's availability that we can get them harvested right then. You know, we want to have perfect numbers and we shoot for stuff, but, you know, if there's a rainstorm coming or there's something coming, you know, sometimes we do have to do some adjustments in the winery where if it's, you know, we got to do a little sugar to bump them up or something. You know, that's part of being the winemaker too, is that, you know, everybody always wants perfect numbers, but it's not always realistic.
Sure. All right. Well, Ode, I think we're at 4:30.
I agree. We are short in time, but if you have any questions, because we didn't have any, but if you realize that you were wondering something, but you didn't have time to put in the chat box, feel free to email us. So thanks everyone for being with us. It was pretty short, but it was good to see what's going on in the vineyard, and hopefully you will be ready soon, because harvest is gonna be here soon.
It is.
So before we close this webinar, I would like to remind you to please take 2 to 5 minutes to complete the survey. You should receive an email with the link of the survey. If not, feel free to use your phone and scan the QR code. That's really just to improve our webinars for the future. And also stay tuned for the future webinar. So the next one is going to be July 25th. It's going to be about must adjustments, just to be ready before the season of winemaking. And then we will see each all together in October. So nothing is going to happen in August and September because everybody is going to be busy. But hopefully you will be back with us to talk about protein instability or stability, whatever, on October 23rd. So on that note, thanks very much, everyone. Thank all panelists. Thank you, Karine. Thank you, Randall, for your great presentation. And thank you, Aline, Bob, John, Chris, Jamieson, and Drew for the great discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ode.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll see you all next month. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.